All right, let's dive right into this explainer on the Battle of Plataea. We're looking at the brutal and entirely chaotic 479 BC land clash that permanently decided the fate of the Greek city-states and really the mighty Achaemenid Empire. Now, this isn't just your standard story of swords and shields. It is the defining moment where the very blueprint of Western civilization fought for its right to exist, pitting fiercely independent defenders against a sprawling, unmatched imperial machine. So you really have to wonder, how in the world did a completely fractured alliance shatter the greatest empire on Earth? I mean, we're talking about fiercely independent, often bitterly rival city-states who were basically forced to work together against a superpower that seemed, for all intents and purposes, invincible. Over the course of this explainer, we're going to explore exactly how shifting momentum, the sheer undeniable dominance of heavy armor in close quarters, and just uncompromising desperation changed the course of history forever. To really grasp this monumental clash, we've got to rewind just a bit to 480 BC. At that point, Greece was teetering on the edge of total collapse. Despite the legendary heroic stand at Thermopylae, Athens had been burned straight to the ground. But after a miraculous Greek naval victory at Salamis, the Persian king Xerxes decided to retreat back to Asia. Now, he didn't just give up. He left behind his elite forces under the command of his top, most trusted general, Mardonius, to finish the job. In response, the Greeks pulled together an unprecedented unified land army and marched north into Boeotia to meet them head-on. Okay, just picture the sheer dread of looking across a field and seeing over 100,000 men waiting for you. Modern estimates put Mardonius's army anywhere from 70,000 to well over 100,000 troops. This was a vast, highly diverse imperial army that vastly outnumbered the unified Greek alliance. The Greeks were fielding roughly 40,000 heavy infantry, known as hoplites, along with tens of thousands of light supporters, and they were all under the command of the Spartan regent Pausanias. Because of this massive numerical disadvantage, the Greeks had to rely entirely on their equipment and their distinct military philosophy. It was literally a clash of combat styles. On one side, you've got the impenetrable, incredibly heavy bronze phalanx of the Greeks. These are guys clad in solid bronze breastplates, carrying massive wood and bronze shields. On the flip side, the Persians relied heavily on cloth armor, lightweight wicker shields, and highly mobile archery. So it really boiled down to weight, discipline, and raw power versus speed, overwhelming numbers, and projectiles. But before a single sword was swung, Mardonius actually tried to just buy a victory. He was smart. He knew if he could just flip the Athenians, the fragile Greek alliance would completely fall apart. So he offered to rebuild their ruined temples and grant them vast new stretches of land if they simply surrendered. Well, the Athenians fiercely rejected this bribe. They declared that as long as the sun crossed the sky, they would fight. And it was this fierce, unyielding defiance that finally forced the somewhat reluctant Spartans to march out of the Peloponnese and meet the threat. Part 1. The Deadly Stalemate. 11 Days of Tension. So the two massive armies finally converge near the Asopus River, and this kicks off an incredibly tense psychological standoff. Imagine the scene here. For 11 nerve-wracking days, 200,000 men are literally just staring each other down across the landscape, and neither side is willing to give up their tactical advantage. The Greeks, very wisely, held the rugged high ground of the foothills and flatly refused to step down into the open plains. They knew for a fact that stepping onto flat terrain meant Mardonius's lightning-fast cavalry could easily flank and destroy them. Trying to break this deadlock, Mardonius unleashes his agile cavalry. They start using these vicious hit-and-run tactics, just raining showers of arrows and javelins onto the Greek lines, and they heavily target the exposed Megarian contingent. Just as the Megarians are about to buckle under the intense pressure, 300 elite Athenian hoplites rush in to back them up. In the bloody skirmish that follows, the dazzlingly armored Persian cavalry commander, a guy named Mecistius, is thrown from his horse and killed by a brutal spear strike to the eye. The Greeks actually paraded his body around, which gave them a massive, much-needed psychological boost. But, the momentum swings right back to the Persians almost immediately. Mardonius realizes he can't lure the Greeks out purely with skirmishing, so he targets their lifelines. Under the cover of darkness, Persian forces managed to capture the Greek supply wagons coming through the mountain passes. And even worse, they managed to foul and poison the Gargaphian spring, which was the primary water source for the entire Greek army. Suddenly, Pausanias finds himself backed into a really desperate tactical corner. Part 2. Chaos and Retreat. A Botched Maneuver. Facing literal starvation and severe dehydration under that blazing Greek sun, the Allied commanders decide they have to order a secret night retreat to better ground. Sounds like a decent plan, right? Well, let's walk through how this maneuver quickly dissolves into absolute chaos. First, the Allied center completely misses their mark in the pitch black, retreating way too far, all the way back to the walls of Plataea itself. Then, over on the right wing, stubborn Spartan battalion commanders flatly refuse to move, arguing that retreating from an enemy was a cowardly disgrace. Because of all this bickering and confusion, when dawn finally breaks, the Greek army is hopelessly fragmented and dangerously exposed right across the plains. Which leads us to this incredible, almost cinematic moment of human drama amidst all the terror. This completely obstinate Spartan commander, Ammophratus, was so outraged by the order to withdraw that he picks up a massive, heavy rock, slams it down right at the feet of his supreme commander, Pausanias, and declares that he is casting his vote to stay and fight right there. It took precious, critical hours for Pausanias to finally coax his forces into moving, which completely cost them the cover of darkness. So when the sun comes up, Mardonius looks out across the field and sees the legendary Spartans and their allies retreating in these disjointed, vulnerable segments. He genuinely, mistakenly believes they are in a full, cowardly rout. Seeing what looks like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to completely crush the fragmented Greeks, he throws all caution to the wind. He orders his entire army to abandon their defensive positions, cross the river, and charge. Part 3. The Final Clash. Deciding the Fate. Now, a massive mistake by the Greeks has essentially triggered an impulsive reaction from the Persians, leading to what becomes a chaotic bloodbath. As the Persian infantry catches up, they plant their wicker shields straight into the ground to form a barricade, and they unleash a massive, relentless hail of arrows. And despite taking heavy casualties, the legendary discipline of the Spartans really shines through here. They just sat patiently behind their heavy bronze shields, absolutely refusing to break rank or counterattack, while Pausanias frantically performed animal sacrifices, just desperately praying to the gods for a favorable omens they could finally engage. Because of that botched nighttime retreat, the battlefield was dangerously fractured into isolated pockets of brutal hand-to-hand combat. The battle was essentially split into two completely different wars. On the right flank, you had the Spartans and Tegeans taking the absolute brunt of the core Persian infantry. Way over on the left flank, miles away, the Athenians were locked in a horrific civil war against the pro-Persian Greeks, mainly the Thebans. And meanwhile, the Greek center was entirely out of position and just racing back to join the fight. Finally, the tension just snaps. The Tegeans, who are unable to sit under this relentless arrow fire for a second longer, break rank and charge the Persians. And at that exact moment, the Spartan omens finally turn good, and they follow the charge with a terrifying roar. This is exactly where equipment dictated history. The heavy Spartan bronze crashed into the Persian wicker shield wall like a massive battering ram. Once it came down to brutal close-quarters combat, the Persian advantage in sheer numbers was totally eliminated by the physical weight and power of the Greek phalanx. And the absolute crucial turning point of the entire battle happens right here, amidst the terrible crush of shields. General Mardonius, who is fighting incredibly bravely at the very front lines atop a magnificent white horse, is struck square in the head by a heavy stone hurled by a Spartan named Aramnescus. He dies instantly. And literally, the moment their commander fell, the entire fighting spirit of the Persian army just completely evaporated. Without their leader, the Persian ranks panicked and broke into a full-blown rout. At the exact same time, over on the left wing, the Athenians finally crushed the Theban resistance. The fleeing Persians desperately retreated back into their heavily fortified wooden camp, just hoping to survive. But the disciplined Greek advance didn't stop. They breached the wooden palisades, and the battle quickly turned into a horrific, claustrophobic slaughter inside those camp walls, because the trapped Persians literally had nowhere left to run. The sheer scale of the devastation here was absolute. Now, while ancient sources do tend to exaggerate, modern historians estimate that the Persians lost anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 men that day, right there in the dust and the mud. In stark contrast, the heavily armored Greeks suffered shockingly low casualties, likely under 2,000 men in total. It was a total, undeniable victory that firmly cemented Greek independence. Part 4. Legacy and Historical Learnings. Why Plataea Matters Today. Stepping back from the actual bloodshed, Plataea proved the undeniable superiority of the heavy hoplite phalanx in close-quarters combat over lightly armored forces. It also revealed a pretty fatal flaw in the Persian military structure. an immense overdependence on a single commanding general. The second Mardonius fell, the whole army collapsed. But most importantly, it proved that unity among fiercely independent, even bitter rival states can somehow overcome vastly superior numerical and logistical odds. The aftermath of Plataea resounded across the entire ancient world. Coupled with the naval victory at Mycale, which happened around the exact same time, it ended the Persian threat to mainland Greece forever. But it wasn't just a military win, right? By firmly securing their borders, Plataea directly paved the way for the golden age of Greece. It allowed the fragile, fledgling ideals of democracy, theater, art, and Western philosophy to really flourish, rather than just being absorbed and erased into a foreign empire. Which really leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought to ponder. Think about the sheer chaos of that botched night retreat, and the pure stubbornness of a few heavily armored men holding the line under a hail of arrows. If that bronze wall had broken in 479 BC, would the ideals of democracy, philosophy, and Western civilization have ever even survived to shape our modern world? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning history.